Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Colorado State University, Pueblo. Um, and I teach courses on like environmental sociology, trying to bring in animal type courses as well. I taught one recently on one welfare, which is about how human, animal, and environmental well-being are all interconnected. Um, and yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. And for me, the background with veganism and or that interest in animals, I guess, is uh, connected with sociology because I uh, decided to try being vegan the first year of my undergrad. And I was like shocked at all the responses that I got from people about that decision that I kind of viewed as a personal, like, dietary choice. But people were like, relating it to gender, like men eat meat, and to nationalism, like it's American to eat meat, and to religion, God made animals for us to eat. And so that got me really thinking about a lot of these concepts in sociology, how those influence our individual behaviors and attitudes, and so
Great. Yeah, and yeah, because it seems like you did most of your education in like Colorado, Utah, and Idaho as well, maybe.
yep,
So I just as an outsider, I do feel like those are in particular places where there's very rigid
yeah.
norm for gender, and for
Mhm.
food, and religion, everything. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
Um, but were you able to find like alliances within your academic circles, or did you feel like there was also a resistance to including animals as significant for these topics?
um well, so during my whole undergrad, I didn't even like realize that animals could be something that sociologists studied. Um, when it was only once I started doing my master's that my advisor was like, "Hey, there's actually like this whole field of study, like," and he mentioned environmental sociology. Um, and so I didn't even realize that there was even its own subcategory of like society and animals. Um, and so it wasn't even really until kind of the tail end of my master's and my PhD that I really got into questions about like animals. And sometimes there was like pushback. um, I remember like so I did my dissertation on dairy farmers and like the role that technology plays in their relationship with their cows. And my committee was like very worried about how a vegan could like be studying this. They're like, you got too many biases and stuff. Um, but everybody has biases related to that. And how am I more biased than someone who's like drinking milk or like participating in the industry? Um, so,
Yeah, no
but
disruptors allowed.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, do you feel like in sociology in general, the animals are studied as like extensions of humans? So either as a pet or as a food source? Are they framed in that way, or do you see models for like looking at animals as sort of independent or maybe more interconnected rather than like yeah, as an extension of the human counterpart?
Yeah, I think both. And maybe like as animals became like objects of study in sociology, it maybe started off a little bit more in that extension way. Like, look, you study the family, and animals are kind of like extensions of your family when they're pets. But I think, yeah, it's definitely that kind of more critical view, um, uh, thinking of animals as independent beings, has definitely like taken a stronger hold, I think, in sociology.
Great. And in terms of like the environmental research, I know you did a lot of work doing research in like the Columbia River Basin. And were you finding impacts on like the different non-human species there, or were you kind of looking at it more in terms of like how it affects the populations in Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, so in that research, I was part of a big like interdisciplinary team looking at the connections of uh, food, energy, and water. And so with that, I kind of did go that dairy route, talking to the dairy farmers about how technology impacts their like relationship with their cows. But we also talked with like different types of resource managers in that area um, about like who they consider stakeholders. And one of the things that came out of that was that the people managing resources do think about animals and the environment as uh, stakeholders. Um, so it's not just, about like the bottom line for a lot of these managers. They're thinking about these other groups when they're making decisions.
Great. What was it like to speak with farmers about the way that they interact with animals? Were they open to discussing it, or did it feel like afraid to be seen? I don't know.
Yeah, so that was one of the challenges is uh I didn't want to be like dishonest uh but I guess I didn't like volunteer that hey, I'm vegan. Um but even just mentioning that I'm a sociologist like put
Mhm.
up some guards for people. So I my dissertation was focused on dairy farmers in Washington, but I was doing my PhD in Utah, so I was like going to visit the dairies around there to kind of do some of that pre research work. And so when I would like call them up, I'd say like, I'm interested in coming and visiting the dairy. I'm a student at Utah State University. And they're like, cool, great. You're like studying agriculture? I'm like, no, I'm studying sociology. And they'd be like, I don't think this is not gonna work out. Like you can't
Mhm.
come visit. um, and so
Wow.
yeah, a couple people did let me come and visit. And even though I was coming at it as a vegan, I still am like interested in farmers and cows living the best life possible. Um, uh, I know that's like a hot topic in like animal welfare and animal liberation, right? Should we like be improving the lives of animals on farms? And I guess I'm kind of the mindset that people are going to continue to do this. And so it's best to try and improve their welfare as much as we can,
Yeah.
while also still working for like animal liberation, um, but recognizing that that might not, that's going to take time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, what do we do in that transitional period? Um, there won't be like this overnight change. So I think it's really interesting for you to do that work and think about what is going on now. So are there openness within the farmers to improving the conditions, or is it, I know you said not all of them were about the bottom line, so I'm just curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of one of the interesting things that came out in the interviews that maybe like relates in some ways to this like future
Mhm.
research on like paradoxes is I talked to one farmer who was like started crying when they were telling me about a cow who got like sick and died. And so it's like, yeah, almost paradoxical where you're like raising cows to be milked, but then also to be slaughtered,
Mhm.
but then also feeling like really attached to them and crying when they do die. Um, uh, but the specific question I was looking at was like the role of technology in like building relationships or kind of facilitating relationships between farmers and their cows. And I thought that technology was like maybe driving them apart, you
Hmm.
know, automatic milking machines and things like that, kind of turning the farm into a factory,
Hmm.
which it is, but also, but the results from the farmers was kind of unexpected, where they actually uh, reported feeling closer to their cows when they did have more of these technologies like automatic milkers. And so I interviewed them and kind of like asked why that was the case after surveying them. And it turns out they don't like milking the cows. The cows don't like being milked by them. And so having this technology kind of do that unpleasant job let them have more time to do what they wanted with the cows, you know, spend time in non-stressful ways with them.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And from there, did you realize like you wanted to continue focusing on animals? Or are there other things in between that brought you to the research that you're doing today?
Yeah, I think I've always wanted to focus on animals since I discovered that that was like
Yeah.
a viable path within sociology. But animals are like kind of embedded in all parts of society, and so I say that I'm an environmental sociologist who studies animals. So the types of questions I ask and the way that I study it is very much like an environmental sociologist would. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess my other research is still pretty heavily embedded in environmental sociology.
Yeah, wonderful. So I was wondering if we could talk about, so the article I found you through the Meatless Menu Paradox. So could you, for those who haven't read it yet or just want to learn more, can you explain what this is?
Yeah. So I guess that's a good segue talking about like an environmental sociologist approaching animal issues. Because there's these two environmental paradoxes, uh, the Jevons paradox and the paperless office paradox, that are basically warnings about the relationship between technology and the environment. So the Jevons paradox is this idea that increased efficiency can lead to increased use of a resource. So this old researcher in the 1800s, William Stanley Jevons, was looking at coal usage and saw that as coal like powered machines became more efficient, they used more coal as a society. Um, and the easiest way to like illustrate this in modern life is like with cars, I think, because we're like often working to make cars more efficient, right? Higher miles per gallon and stuff like that. But as we make cars more efficient, people change their other habits. So you drive more often. You choose to live farther away from your job. You make bigger cars and trucks and things like that, so that those gains in efficiency with like engines are kind of canceled out. Um, and so efficiency is good, and it's like something we should strive for. Um, but it can also kind of have this paradoxical effect where it increases
Yeah.
resource usage. Um, and then the second one is the paperless office paradox, which is kind of related, but it's more about displacement instead of efficiency. So in like the 70s and 80s, uh, computer technology was introduced into offices. And they're like, wow, this is great. We're going to like replace paper. We can do it all on the computer now, which will be good for the environment. We have less trees to cut down. But what happened is paper usage skyrocketed. And the reason for that is yes, the computer replaced some technology, but it also like facilitated a lot of like paper usage. So uh, people were like had access to all these files that were hard to get before, right? And so suddenly they could each print them out instead of having to go somewhere to get them. Printing out emails, just easier to print. And
Mhm.
so the paper usage actually increased during that time period and kind of continued until just very recently, where it's kind of started to plateau and maybe decline in a few places. So,
Mhm.
okay,
Wow.
so that brings us
Yeah.
to the meatless menu paradox,
Yes.
which it's looking at all these plant-based substitutes that companies have started to roll out, and in particular, kind of meat-based companies and fast food chains. So one of the first ones was like Carl's Jr. with their Beyond Burger, uh, but Burger King has like the Impossible Whopper. KFC dabbled in their like plant-based chicken for a while. A lot of fast food has like done this. Um, and so some people like look at that and they're like, that's great. It's like signs of a changing society. And maybe it'll convince more people to adopt a plant-based diet. But these paradoxes are kind of like a warning about this, where um, uh, these substitutes may actually contribute to increased overall meat consumption as these meat-based companies use that added capital to grow and expand. So in the United States, we've kind of like reached the limit in terms of meat consumption. We're like eating it for every meal. It's like there's not a lot of room to add meat to our diet. Um, but uh, globally, there's a lot of countries where meat consumption has been historically low and is now starting to rise. And that's where a lot of these companies are looking to expand. There's like not a lot more room for McDonald's in the United States. And I think it's even decreased in the past like decade. Um, but it's increased globally and they have like plans to continue to expand. So the meatless menu paradox is basically saying like they're just trying to capture another market, right? That's
Hmm.
what they do. And so by giving money to these meat-based corporations, that could actually fuel the global meat consumption. Even if looking at like maybe the smaller scale, a few people do transition away within the United States, the global picture will be more meat consumption, more animal suffering.
Yeah. So do you think there's room for like a totally plant-based fast food company to take over, or should we be moving away in general from like thinking that a corporation is going to save us? Yeah.
Yeah. um, yeah, well, that's a tough question, right?
Hmm.
And uh, well, I mean, it kind of harkens back to that like question of like welfare versus liberation. Like, should we be embracing these small steps, or should we be like demanding more? Um, and I don't know if I have the answer, honestly. Um, uh, yeah, it's a hard one. Um,
Are there more
I'm,
like community like I guess if you were to meet somebody who was curious about transitioning their diet, like what would you recommend in terms of just like at home steps or maybe like community or local based steps for them to do?
um, well, yeah, I guess first thing I would like, I would suggest like trying some of the meat alternatives, right? That's probably the easiest way. And in blind taste tests, people do rate the Impossible beef as higher than like uh, cow beef. Um, uh, but also maybe just like take a look at their diet and how much of it is already um, plant-based, because we like I'm trying to think of the joke. It's like, hey, try this apple. And then they like take a bite and you're like, that's a vegan apple. And they're like, oh, I thought it tasted strange. It's like a lot of people are already eating plants and vegan food.
Mhm.
Um, and in my opinion, that like added animal product is usually a small part of it. And so I don't know, taking that out feels big, but once you do it, it's not as big as it
Yeah.
seems.
Yeah, I always think it's funny. Say to someone that Oreos are vegan or like Junior Mints, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
know this is still the issue of like it's a huge company making it.
Mhm.
But I think it always does surprise people that they're like, wait, what? I thought it had to be like salads and
Mhm.
um so I think that's a great approach of just yeah, showing that we don't need things, especially like an ingredient like gelatin or something where I'm like, why does this even exist?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to eat this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like the
Yeah.
other classic joke where like you pick up like a piece of broccoli and it has like ingredients, 99% broccoli, 1% milk powder. Like, why? Why is milk powder in everything?
I
But
know. Yeah, it's just one of those like sinister deals that have been made.
yeah.
Yeah, even in croutons sometimes I find it and I'm like, this crouton doesn't even have like a flavor to it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so with the meatless menu paradox though, what do you suggest as our way out of it, or is it something that we cannot escape, hence being a paradox?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably will require structural changes. I guess that's what I come back to always as like a sociologist, like individual behavior, definitely people should do it, but there's things built into our system that um, just like drive these broader trends. And so like one of those is meat subsidies. Um, as long as corporations can continue to make profits from selling meat, they're going to do it. But uh, those profits right now are like held up by government's subsidies. The like true cost of a hamburger is something like $20. I don't know the exact number, but it's like way higher than what they're able to charge for it with those subsidies. So shifting those from animal products to uh, plant products would make a huge difference. And for those individual choices then that follow from that, that's another um, huge thing. Um, because for a lot of people, that money is the bottom line about which product they're going to choose.
hmm Yeah. And that's definitely something that comes up to beyond just the taste or options is like thinking that it's unaffordable or and like you're saying, even threatening livelihood for people like the farmers, like those are two really difficult things to talk through.
Yeah, and that's another area that I'd like to maybe like expand into with my research is that environmental sociology applying it to animals. The just transition has focused on like fossil fuel industries, how they transition from coal and oil to renewable energy, and how we take care of like the workers in those industries while making that transition. And I think that well, we can have that same conversation about like uh, farmers working with animals, right? How can they transition um, from that to farming plants or mushrooms or whatever it is, and not just be left behind to fend for themselves.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I feel like that's a good place to end, like looking forward and into future research. Is there anything else you want to share with folks before you go, or best ways to stay in touch with you, if people want to learn more?
Um, uh, I have my website and my Google Scholar page.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best way to keep up with what I'm up to. So,
Great.
but yeah, anyone's free to reach out in emails anytime. So,
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk more soon.